Alright, let's talk about the books. I have been a strong believer in the idea that the FNAF books take place in the same timeline as the games. The idea has been plummeting recently because of some stuff in Secret of the Mimic, which seems to put the narrative Tales from the Pizzaplex gave us into question. I had an explanation for how this stuff could work under Tales still being in the games, however, I no longer agree with it. Or at least not half of it. The same day I uploaded that video, I hopped on the phone with my friend Maitani, who is also a FNAF theorist, and we laid out our thoughts, and we came up with a much better explanation for how Secret of the Mimic works with Tales from the Pizzaplex being in the games. So next week, I will be uploading a video that corrects this one, and explains what I now believe. Anyway, in this video, I just want to talk about the books and talk to the fandom, because most of the theories I've talked about regarding Secret of the Mimic haven't actually been much of what is actually in the game, and instead I've just been struggling because I couldn't figure out what I was supposed to do with the books. Not just Tales from the Pizzaplex, but also Fazbear Frights and the interactive novels. But let's just focus on Tales right now, since that's the book series a majority of the fandom is saying it cannot work in the game's continuity. Listen, if Tales from the Pizzaplex doesn't take place in the same timeline as the games, then that is a very weird decision. Because now we just have a timeline where the Mimic is created in the early days of Fazbear Entertainment. Now we just jump all the way to the modern era, and now we got the Mimic still trapped inside of the underground pizzeria, no resolution there. We got a plot about Gregory killing a bunch of his school counselors, which also doesn't go anywhere. Edwin having traumatic flashbacks when he sees Mimic 1 being used in the Pizzaplex, which isn't given an explanation either. Overall, you just got a bunch of one-off stories that seem like they are meant to lead somewhere, but they simply don't. The conclusion you would be meant to come to is that the Mimic being trapped in the underground pizzeria is supposed to explain why it suddenly shows up in ruin in the underground pizzeria. Gregory killing his counselors leads into the Patient 46 plotline from Security Breach. The Mimic taking over the Pizzaplex in general shows that this stuff is meant to lead into what happens in Security Breach and Ruin. The way Tales is written makes them seem to happen around the events of the actual games, which is why I believe Tales is meant to be in the same timeline as the games. Fazbear Frights does the exact same thing. There's constant mentions of the missing children's incident. There is literally a story about Fazbear's Fright and William being tortured like how we see in Ultimate Custom Night. There are events that take place after the FNAF 6 fire involving Eleanor and the Stitch Rave. Frights also gives us an ending to Ultimate Custom Night, and it shows Afton's official death, which is he turns into a giant trash rabbit and is defeated by Charlotte, the soul of his first ever victim. Fazbear Frights gives us a conclusion to Afton's story, to the puppet story, and the Vengeful Spirit's story. It pretty much seems to wrap up remaining pieces of the old story before we jump into the brand new story, that being Security Breach and Tales from the Pizzaplex. So a common argument that I think a lot of people will have is, why don't I just use all those book series in the same way I use the novel trilogy when theorizing? Now, after Secret of the Mimic, I also have thought about doing that, because even though the novel trilogy is confirmed to be a different continuity from the games, they are also confirmed to be a reimagining of the game's storyline. A lot of aspects of my beliefs of FNAF 1 through 6 that the games themselves don't really explain or go much into, the way I solve those types of details is I look at what the novel trilogy says, and that's how I figure things out, like William's motives for killing the kids, who William and Henry are as people, the timeline of the different Fazbear restaurants, how William discovered the supernatural in the first place, how Elizabeth was treated growing up, why she acts the way she does now, why the kids' spirits kill people, how Afton is able to manipulate the kids in the first place. All of these, and even more than what I listed, I feel like are explained in the novel trilogy. So again, why can't I use the other books in the same way? Why can't I believe Fazbear Frights, Tales from the Pizzaplex, and the interactive novels are reimaginings of the games too? The reason I don't think the books can operate like this is because what exactly is being reimagined? Sure, some easy answers you could say are the Missing Children's Incident, Ultimate Custom Night, FNAF 3, the Rogue Indie Dev story, and Gregory being Patient 46. You could even say the books are just explaining how the supernatural and science fiction elements of the series work, since they explain what Remnant is, what Agony is, and how Glitchtrap can control his victims. But there is also a lot that can't be explained by just assuming these books are reimagining the games. The best example, in my opinion, is the existence of the Stitchrave Stingers. The Stitchrave has 4 souls in it, those souls being Jake, a young boy who died from a brain tumor. Then there's Andrew, who in the Fazbear Frights is the one you should not have killed. Then William Afton's soul is also in there. And there's Eleanor, who is an agony being made up of Afton's evil. The reason all of their souls inhabit one body is because of a mad scientist combining a bunch of haunted objects together. Anyway, the way their story goes is Andrew, in his anger, split his soul into multiple pieces and infected lots of Fazbear-related items, which are now torturing and killing people. Jake collects all the infected items, attempting to destroy them, but it turns out Afton's soul was also split into all the items, and now he was latching onto all of them being combined to turn himself into a giant amalgamation of agony. A police officer stops Afton by getting Charlotte's soul to attack him, and that marks the end of both Afton and Charlotte's story. Jake also puts Andrew in a happiest day, which also marks the end of the Vengeful Spirits story. Now, there is just Jake and Eleanor. Jake manages to stop Eleanor, and then he goes into the spirit realm to free the souls of everyone Eleanor killed and is currently still tormenting. That is a lot, and if you want to believe the Stitchrave Stingers, which, let me remind everyone, only has pieces of it thrown at the end of every Frights book, meaning it would be one of the most important stories. If you want to believe that's a reimagining of the games, well, you can't, because the games never show anything like that happen after Ultimate Custom Night. At least not directly. It just moves right onto the Mimic era. By only taking what the games show, Ultimate Custom Night doesn't seem to end. It would just be Andrew continuing to torture William forever, I guess. Seems kind of weird that we are getting books that explains how Ultimate Custom Night ends, explains how Afton and Andrew have their stories concluded, yet there is nothing in the actual games or even hinted at in the actual games for this book to be a reimagining. Which at that point, if you still want to insist that these are reimagining the games, then you might as well think the events of the Stitchrave Stingers are game line, and we just don't see it. Which then gives you no reason to think the game events are any different from the Frights at all. It's confusing like that already, but even more confusing when the Stingers even connects itself to other Fright stories, such as Into the Pit, To Be Beautiful, Count the Ways, Fetch, Out of Stock, 1:35 a.m., Step Closer, Dance With Me, The Man in Room 1280, Blackbird, The Real Jake, and Hide and Seek. So, do those all happen in the games but slightly differently? Why don't we ever hear about them? Tales from the Pizzaplex presents the same issue. The storyteller shows Edwin alive during the Pizzaplex era, and it shows how the Mimic infects pretty much everything in the Pizzaplex. Yet the games have no equivalent to that during the Pizzaplex era. The games also don't provide an explanation to why the Mimic is suddenly inside of the Pizza Sim location other than,
I really don't know what it is, but it's been trapped down here a really long time.
Which people think that Murray's Costume Manor is under Pizza Sim, which I agree with that. However, Tales quite literally shows the Mimic get shipped to the pizza place, while it is being turned into a museum, which I've heard people say they just don't think that happens in the games, but then why is Tales telling us this is how the Mimic gets to the Pizza Sim location if that's not how it gets there? M2 just being trapped for decades is a theory, while M2 being shipped to the pizza place is information that is actually given to us. Back to the storyteller, I'm hearing a lot of people saying that Edwin dies in this audio log.
I'm sorry, M2. I lost my temper. I was always gonna fix you. Please, call for help. M2, respond. M2, help.
However, we never actually hear him die. If this were to be an incident that Edwin did somehow manage to survive, then this would actually explain some weird things in the Storyteller. In the Storyteller, when Edwin sees the tiger head is being put inside of the baobab, he audibly gasps, drops to his knees, and starts covering his ears while closing his eyes. The only explanation on why Edwin is reacting like that is because Edwin is remembering a, quote, horror from his past. Later, when Edwin finds out the Storyteller is Mimic 1, he freaks out again, even saying, "It was happening again." Edwin very clearly in the Tales timeline has a traumatic history with the Mimic. Yet nothing Edwin goes through in the Mimic would warrant that kind of reaction. Tales never explains why Edwin is so traumatized by the Mimic. But if we apply what we learn in Secret of the Mimic, where Edwin is trying to use M1 and M2 to recreate his family, how after exposing M2 to violence, it retaliates and almost kills Edwin, as we see in the game, then suddenly we have an actual answer to why Edwin is so traumatized in the Storyteller. He's associating the Mimic with a time where he was absolutely going crazy, and he is associating the Mimic with a near-death experience. I genuinely do believe the stuff we see in Secret of the Mimic is supposed to be the explanation for why Edwin is terrified of Mimic 1 in the Storyteller. Listen, I get why Tales from the Pizzaplex being in the games seems unlikely to people. I was on the fence about it for a bit, which admittedly comes down to the way I like to theorize about this franchise. Which is, if it's an official piece of FNAF media, then it's canon to FNAF. When I say canon, I do not mean continuity, I mean canon. The novel trilogy and the movie are not in the game's continuity, obviously. However, those are still canon. However, since the other books, such as Fazbear Frights, Tales from the Pizzaplex, and the interactive novels try to happen around the games, and fill in certain blanks from the games, then that leads me to believe that they should be in the game's continuity, because of the narrative they are giving us. Which is why not believing Tales from the Pizzaplex is in the games does not sit right with me. I don't want to take certain information over other information. I still don't entirely agree with this video, however, so here's the plan. Next week, I will have an updated version of my last video, and this version will directly acknowledge the book debate, why I think Tales can still work, and what I think Secret of the Mimic adds to it. The videos after that will be like normal. I'm not going to continue making videos addressing the continuity debate. I am still going to continue to operate my theory videos under the idea that the books are in the game's timeline. That's just how it's going to be. Now thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye everyone.